live, so please feel free to start your own watch parties and share the video from my page for those of you who are on my page. And I'm actually going to turn that so we can do speaker view. Because we see you, Fari. Okay, so welcome everybody to our second episode of, or live, I don't know if we call it episodes, but live of the hashtag Pat Down 202 storytelling series. Today, very excited to have on two pillars in my ward, Ward 4, where I grew up and currently live. But we'll get into their bios in a second, and just want to start with intros with the PAAT Fellows. So starting with myself, Chioma Oruh. I am parent of two amazing, brilliant sons on the autism spectrum, Auntie and Jedi. I'm currently attending non-public schools in DC, well, in Rockville, but they are, for all intents and purposes, District of Columbia Public School students. And we live in a historic neighborhood of Tacoma. So I'm going to pass it on to Fari. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Fari Gamina Tumpe. I'm a Bright Beam PAAT Fellow. I'm also a custodial grandmother of two very unique and amazing children with social and emotional learning disorders on this journey of educational advocacy to eradicate many of the cultural biases and educational inequities within our special needs system, and with also the mental health system of care at large. Also doing a lot of work with social injustice causes to eradicate food deserts and medicines for all, and many other causes that plague our Black and brown communities, unemployment. There are so many issues that directly affect the education of our children. So just trying to work to holistically improve the lives of our family leaders and all of our children in DC.
Thank you. You want to pass on to the other fellow?
Okay, I will popcorn it to the beautiful Yolanda.
I will keep it brief because I have kids in the background. My name is Yolanda Corbett. I am a PAAT Fellow here. Outside of this, I am a parent ambassador for Advocates for Justice, as well as a Ward 7 parent leader in education and citywide representative for Parents Amplified Voices in Education. I have three sons in charter schools, ages 14, 12, and 6. My 14-year-old was diagnosed with autism and attends Washington Leadership Academy. My other two children are Taki and Inspired Teaching. I'm glad to be here.
The education of our children. So just trying to.
And I'll kick it off to Angelique. Or maybe Elizabeth.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Braddock. I am a mother of 5. I have 2 children that go to school in the district. One at a DC public charter school, the other at just a DC public school, high school specific. My son that goes to a public charter school actually has autism as well, like some of the other. Basically, I guess my role in the group and just my role in general involves elevating youth voices and establishing like real connections and real opportunities for youth voices to be heard. Also, you know, of course, I do the parent advocacy. I'm also a parent leader with the organization PAAT that Yolanda spoke about. Well, I'm a Ward 7 parent representative for that. I'm also on the I'm a part of the Family and Youth Committee for the Coordinating Council for School Behavioral Health. So I try to, advocate in many different avenues and create opportunities for our youth and our families and our parents to be able to be a presence. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. So we have two other fellows who I think will get back on here at some point. We have Angelique and Michelle. They'll be joining us soon. So I'm going to turn it over. We're going to start first with Janeese, and then we'll go to Frazier.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is JaneeseLewis George. I am the Democratic nominee for Ward 4 on the DC Council. I am also a proud graduate of DC Public Schools and a third-generation DC native. And I am excited to be with you to learn and to listen, and then to use what I've learned and gain to advocate on your behalf and on your children's behalf.
Thank you, Janeese. And Frazier, last but not least.
I'm Frazier O'Leary. My youngest child just graduated from St. John's University in New York, where Janeese is also an alumni. And my other children are now old. And my son taught at Cardozo for a year. My daughter taught at Hearst Elementary for 4 years. My son Ryan is my campaign man. I'm running again for the Ward 4 State Board of Education. I don't know why, but there's no one running against me. So I guess that's good, although I don't know, because I've never done this before. I've only been in politics, or whatever you want to call it, for 2 years. But I taught I'm still teaching at UDC and still tutoring at high schools in this city. So I guess I've been teaching for over 50 years now. And that's what I look at everything through, that lens of being a teacher for students. And all my teaching was done. I started at Garner-Patterson Junior High School in 1969. And I moved up to Cardozo in 1977 and taught at Cardozo until 2017, and I've been teaching at UDC since 1983. So I am an advocate for those students that don't have, and that's what I look at everything through, that lens.
Great, thank you so much. Now, want to say just a little bit about when we say PAAT Fellows, what we mean, for those who may be the first time you're tuning in. PAAT stands for Parent Advocacy Action Team. Their fellowship is part of the Bright Beam Network, and Bright Beam Network is a nonprofit organization based out of Minneapolis. And so I am a lead activist here in DC for Bright Beam. And we have another lead activist in DC, Maurice Cook, who does a lot of stuff with the Internet for All. And so, and we have lead activists spread out through the country. And so this is our little team here, and our focus is on, connecting the racial equity question with special education and the opportunity gap, particularly for our Black and Brown students with disabilities, knowing that they disproportionately are not graduating. They are ending up with certificates of completion. Their reading rates are abysmal, and, just safe passage through schools. And that means maybe something slightly different than the average student. We know all of our students, especially all of our Black and Brown students, need safe passage. But for our children with disabilities, that also means just emotional passage and just not, being able to safely access the curriculum anywhere they are placed, wherever their placement may be. So all of that said, we're gonna jump right into our storytelling, because we wanna hear from Janeese and Frazier. Very excited. I'm a proud Ward 4 resident. As I said before, I grew up in Ward 4 when my family first moved to the United States from Nigeria in '89. And, I attended Tacoma Education Campus, where my kids went to school for a long time. So they are now placed non-publicly, and they may come back for high school. So, just really hoping that, we enlighten everybody that's listening. And I think I'm the only PAAT fellow that's a Ward 4 resident. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we, so this is a special area of topic, but we also know that Ward 4 is unique in DC. And I don't say that just because I live there. Ward 4 has participated in some of the highest levels of government, or Ward 4 residents have participated in some of the highest levels of government. But I think and that's kind of what people know about Ward 4, but people rarely know like just the disparities in Ward 4, the challenges in Ward 4, the issues that are unique to Ward 4, or that may mirror other parts of the city, but also show up in Ward 4. So that's what I really love for Frazier and Janeese to kind of deepen and help us understand where Ward 4 fits in relationship to all of our wards, particularly the Black and Brown lens for that, as best as you can tap into that. And so my first question, and then each fellow will ask their own, is what are you guys' earliest memories of advocating in Ward 4, and what were those issues? So I'm going to start with you, Frazier.
I would think my earliest memory of Ward 4 was probably as a coach. I coached all of the major sports at Cardozo: baseball, football, basketball. I coached tennis one year, but I coached girls basketball for a long time. I was the baseball coach for over 40 years. And so my memories of Ward 4, before I moved to Ward 4, were going to games at Coolidge or going to games at Roosevelt. When I moved into Ward 4 on Farragut Street in 1977, the neighborhood, I was the second white person on the block, and the neighborhood's changed quite a bit. And the neighborhoods around have changed dramatically. And that's the same thing that happened at Cardozo. When I first went to Cardozo, we had a couple of non-African American students out of 1,800 students. And now Cardozo is maybe 52% Latino and maybe 45% African American, and the others are from other places. Every now and then there's a white kid that shows up at Cardozo and makes it through it. But so I think the earliest memory was probably trying to beat the teams in Ward 4. I don't know if that's advocating for Ward 4, but it was trying to beat Coolidge or Roosevelt when I was coaching. Sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. It really didn't have anything to do with the ward. And I'll be honest with you, I've lived here for a long time. I would think almost as, for some of you, longer than you've been alive. But the thing about it is that I didn't really know much. I'd never been to an ANC meeting until I started running for office, because I was coaching, I was teaching, I was husbanding, and I was parenting. And those of you with children on screen or off screen or whatever, I mean, that's more than 24 hours a day. So I really wasn't involved with the community, so to speak. So everything that I've been doing for the last 2 years and 1 month, because I started running in August of 2018, has been going to every community meeting, going to all the ANC meetings, and all that other. So I've really learned a whole lot about Ward 4 since I moved in. I don't know if I think that's probably not an early memory, but it is for me as far as what Ward 4 was after I started running for it.
Great, thank you. And Janeese.
Yeah, so, I grew up here in Ward 4, and so I guess my earliest memory advocating first would take me to Rudolph Elementary, where I attended school as a young kid, and where me and all my siblings attended Rudolph. And I guess the first advocacy was when I was a student. There was a summer and then a subsequent winter once the fall started, where our air conditioners didn't work. And I remember being a student, hot in class, and everybody was up in arms and like, what are we gonna do? And at the time, my mom was up in arms, just like every other parent was, that we didn't have air in our school, air conditioners in our school. And then we ended up going into the fall, not having, the adequate heating system. And so teachers were bringing in heaters in the school. And I was just a young girl at that point. And so when our parents were advocating, we, created little signs like, we want air, we want, we deserve heat and air in our schools. So that was like, I think my earliest memory of advocating as a young person in a non-formal capacity. My earliest memory advocating, I think, in a formal capacity is that transition for me from Rudolph Elementary to Deal Junior High School. And I always talk about just remembering leaving, 2nd and Kennedy Street, getting, across the Military Road for the first time at the age of 11. And I didn't even know I was still in DC once we passed Military Road. And, just everything was different, from the houses to the grocery stores, playgrounds, just everything was different. But the quality of just education, and there was, no fighting for, there was no fighting for books that had pages. Every book had a page. You weren't fighting over, it wasn't a fight for, a air conditioner. That was the least of our worries. Coming in the morning, making sure that, we had breakfast and all of these things, and all of these parent supports were all there. And so that really kind of ignited my, first interest in wanting to serve. And I ended up running to be school board member. And so I had an opportunity to serve on the DC school board. This was pre-mayoral rule. And I got to serve under Dr. Clifford Janey, who was the superintendent at the time. Peggy Cooper Kafich was the president at the time, and others, William Lockridge, all three of which are no longer here with us, but definitely had an imprint on me as a young advocate in education. And remembering just being on the school board and listening to William Lockridge go at it, and Tommy Wells. I mean, it was so many leaders who deeply cared about our school system. And I was also there when once Adrian Fenty got elected, and he fired Dr. Janey. I was going out from high school to college, and really that was one of the biggest blows to education. And I don't think we've ever recovered since.
So I'm going to pass it on to Elizabeth. Your ball's in your court. What's your question?
Thank you, Chioma. Thank you for sharing your stories and the perspective that you are bringing. I guess my question would be, with your advocacy, either at the time of when you first started and now, what have you noticed as being the major barriers to actually, I guess, getting results, making change, changing ideas? What have you discovered to be the hardest part in accomplishing goals?
Are we doing the same order, or are we going back and forth on that?
Well, you already started talking, so you're right.
Okay. Well, I think for me, the biggest barrier is the same barrier there was when I was a teacher under mayoral control. I don't think the schools should be run by the mayor. I think the schools should be run by educators. And it's very, very difficult for us on the Board of Education to get any information from the public schools or the public charter schools. And I think a perfect example of that is when the mayor set up her reopen DC committees. The Board of Education was not even asked to be a member of the education committee, and they had 30 people on it. And so it's really, really difficult and I knew what I was getting into, but because Fenty had taken all of the power away from the State Board of Education, so that we are just an advisory board. We don't have anything to do with who the chancellor is, who the new superintendent of OSSE will be. And I think that all needs to change. That's a huge obstacle.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Dr. Frazier O'Leary, but I'm also regarding mayoral control. But I think there's a few things I would say are also challenges. One, there seems to be a challenge in this city to define what equity is. There seems to be this idea that everyone yells and says, you know, we need equity, but when it comes into practice, it doesn't happen. And so they will define things in terms of accomplishments, but won't define what that looks like. So for example, our literacy rate in the District of Columbia, they'll say, oh, our literacy has gone up, but it's gone up for white students, but hasn't gone up for Black students, right? So where's equity in that conversation if we're talking about that? We'll say, you know, we need equity in schools, but then all of Ward 3 schools have school counselors and school librarians, and Ward 7 and Ward 8 are fighting for counselors and librarians and losing them as we speak. And so, you know, one of the issues in advocacy seems to be, what is equity really, honestly? Because, you know, the divide amongst our Black and brown students and our white students has continued to grow over the last 10 years. There also seems to be an issue that we come into where everyone believes that they have the answer without ever talking to the veterans of education, right? And so you have a lot of young people coming in, you know, TFA alums, things of that nature, and they're like, oh, we need a new way of doing education. Let's kick everyone out that was there before. And all those people held institutional knowledge. You know, teachers like, you know, Frazier O'Leary, who've been there for 30 years, who know what it means to teach students. And then there's this dependence on test scores, right? Everything's equated to test scores. And so teachers are constantly under this you know, impact evaluation system that is more punitive than it is helpful to our teachers and the way that they teach and the way our students learn. And then we have a star rating system that does basically the same thing, where it equates our schools and rates them in a place where it disproportionately impacts the community, the schools in our area. So, you know, I think some of one of the huge barriers absolutely is mayoral control, but the other barrier is that when it comes to equity, we seem to, as a city, not come up with a real definition. And then whatever that definition is, we haven't achieved it, and we cover that up with facades of accomplishment without looking at the gaps between Black students, and Black and brown students and our white students.
There you go. Keep doing this. I was like, that's great. And I wish it was my question next, but it is actually Fari's turn. So Fari, what's your question?
First of all, Dr. Frazier and Janeese, I want to thank you for all that you've sown, not only into the Ward 4 community, but into DC as a whole. I certainly appreciate your passion, and I'm very hopeful for all that you're going to bring to not only the State Board of Education, but to the City Council. So I'm praying that all goes well on both fronts for both of you guys. But I would like to know, what is your actual experience in the Ward 4 education space? What are some key observations that your constituents need to know?
Yeah. You know, I think one of the observations we have in Ward 4 when it comes to education, I want to say we have, you know, one of the most amazing, we have a Ward 4 Education Alliance, Kathy Riley, an organization that does great work. One thing I've noticed about Ward 4, you know, let's look at the makeup of Ward 4, how many schools we have. So I think we have about 15 charter schools here in our ward, and then equally the same amount of public schools. We have 2 high schools, Roosevelt and Coolidge, that are doing great and have made advancements, as well as 2 middle schools, Ida B. Wells being our newest middle school. And one of the things I see is that, you know, in the elementary school space, we get a lot of community buy-in. So most of our parents are sending their students to their elementary schools in Ward 4, which is great for building community, because I absolutely believe that schools really build on community. And that's how we meet each other as a community, as parents going to school, as students, we grow as a community. And so one of the things that's just been disheartening is to see, once students leave elementary, parents are sending them, you know, either to, you know, outside the ward to other schools, and we don't have the same investment in our middle schools and high schools. And so one of the things I want to be keenly focused on is getting parents to believe in our Ward 4 middle schools and high schools, and having it so your students will go from elementary to middle and high school together, where they can say, you know, we all had the same third grade teacher, which my sister and I, you know, my brother, we all had the same elementary school teachers. And so my mom kind of knew, oh Lord, here we go, back to writing multiplication 100 times again. But it was special in that way. And so one of my observations is that as a community, we have to also be willing to stop the, I think what I would consider is parents being like, okay, well, my students can go to school here in Ward 4, but then we'll send our students to Ward 3 for high school. We'll send our students to Wilson and Walls and other schools, but not send them to Roosevelt and Coolidge. And we are what makes our communities great, you know? And so one of my observations is going to be championing our DC public schools here in Ward 4, and not championing them and getting parents buy-in, but the way you do that is by resourcing those schools, resourcing those teachers, resourcing the administrators, and making sure they have every single thing that Wilson and Walls and all these other schools have. I want the same curriculum. I want the same expectations of educators, the same expectation of students. I want the same exposure to resources and allocations. And I think if we do our part on the advocacy end and the funding end of making sure that our schools are equipped, our parents would be willing to come back to our community and build here. Because I've always thought that Ward 4 parents and students really, have made a huge difference across our city when they've gone to other schools.
I started at Garner-Patterson, and my former principal passed away 2 weeks ago. She was 91 years old. Her name was Dr. Margaret Labat, and she was a fabulous principal. And we had what was called a community school. We had students. I ran into a student in the Safeway this morning who must be 60. I think he's about 65 years old now, but he was my student when I first started teaching. And he was talking about how it was at Garner-Patterson, because they came early in the morning before school with their parents. The parents were involved all day long as aides in the classroom, and we had after-school activities. And it was a real community school. What bothers me right now about the schools, and I've been lucky enough, I started collecting books. I don't know if you know about it, but I started collecting books in January for the elementary schools in the ward, because I as an English teacher knew that if the students need to have a book, their own book, to be able to take home their own book is really important. So we've been really lucky to get to distribute over 10,000 books since January to the elementary and the high school and the middle schools in the ward. But the problem that I've noticed, and so that means I was in all the buildings. The things that I've noticed that there are, when Janeese was talking about Roosevelt and Coolidge and Ida B. Wells and McFarland, all really brand new buildings, less than 10 years old, all right? But we got some elementary schools in the ward that are almost as old as Cardozo was Cardozo was over 100 years old, and it was finally remodeled in 2013. And there are schools like Truesdale and Whittier and Raymond that are sorely lacking in creature comforts, all right? When Janeese was talking about air conditioning, we didn't get air conditioning at Cardozo until the 2000s. And we know how September is in Washington, D.C. It's a lot hotter in September than it is in July and June, that's for sure. And so what I've noticed is that I'm not talking about, we're never going to be equitable because we're dealing with human beings, but we need to make sure that those that don't have get, and to help those that do have to do better. Now, I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm much more concerned as I was with my students. I knew that my students would come with reading difficulty and all that, but that didn't mean, I didn't treat them like they couldn't read. They had to read and write all the time. It's practice, practice, practice all the time. And that's what we need to work on as a community, not just in Ward 4, because somebody lives in Ward 6, I know, and somebody lives in Ward 7. And, we need to work as a city to make sure that those that don't have get. And that's one thing that I haven't noticed in the government. We have people working on the State Board of Education that are a little less passionate than I am about that. And I'm not going to stop talking about it, because I've only got one horse in the race, and that's a horse that has students, parents, teachers, and staff on the saddle. So that's what I think. That's my observation, is we need to take care of those schools that don't have the things that they're supposed to have. And I've got something about that a little later.
Can I add one thing? Can I add one thing, Chioma? Just, I wanted to say one thing also I noticed, because it's special to Ward 4, I think also, we have, one of the largest immigrant populations in our ward. And a lot of our students are English as a second language. Specifically here in Ward 4, we have one of the Latino populations as well as African immigrant populations. And we don't do enough to bridge the gap with language access from our students and our parents. And it's a huge disservice to our families. Even now during virtual learning, they're not taking into account that we have a number of students whose parents are Spanish speaking only. And so their ability to step in as teachers and communicate with the teachers has also been stifled as a result. And one of the things we see here in Ward 4 also is, everybody wants to send their students to dual language schools. And, the fight for dual language schools isn't new. Back when I was in elementary school, everybody was trying to get into Oyster because they knew that they had a dual language program. It was like the battle of the century to get in. And I didn't win the lottery on that one, so I didn't get in. But it did make a difference. And so I don't understand why we are here now and we don't have dual language programs at every single school. At this point, all of our schools should have dual language, but specifically here in Ward 4, where we have a huge Latino population and African immigrant population, we have to address those needs. And sometimes that funding that's supposed to go to our English second language students and our dual language programs actually doesn't make it to them because of budget constraints within the school. And so we have to continue to understand the language access problem that we have in our ward. I would like to see all of our schools being dual language. And that also means we need to also hire more teachers of Black and brown teachers. It makes an impact on students and their abilities. We know that from research. And so we need more Spanish speaking educators and aides also to support our families and our communities here in Ward 4.
Thank you so much. I'm a lifelong Ward 6 resident, and many of those issues are mirrored in our community, especially as it relates to the racial inequities as a result of gentrification and changes within the community. But I just want you to ponder, which I'm sure you are well aware of, take all of the issues that you mentioned as it relates to general ed and then compound them for our families of children with special needs. And these things that are just new and how we need to change the framework from the pandemic with language barriers and access to books and things like that. These issues that plague our families of children with special needs have gone on for centuries, not centuries, for years, for decades, have gone on for decades. And so the work, I will state again, I'm so very, very proud of the work that you're doing. And I'm thankful that Chioma has brought this platform to the community so people will be aware of those who are really passionate about bringing changes to Ward 4.
I'd just like to add one thing, just add it to what you've just been saying, Fari, is that the picture what it's like for a parent in virtual learning who doesn't know anything about working a laptop or a device or anything like that, whose child has not only special needs, an IEP, but is also an English language learner. And see, the system, did nothing for those children from March to June. And as far as I'm concerned, we, the system, has done hardly anything from June to September, because it's very hard to get information from any of the upper level administrators in both the charter and public systems about what is being done to get the buildings ready when they finally open. Because our kids are, it's a desert. A lot of them have been on this day. It's not like summer vacation where you've got a little, you don't read over the summer or something. You got to go back and figure out how to do algebra or something I never figured out. But and when you come in September, you get a little, but now it's ongoing. It's almost October now. And they've extended the deadline for us being under an advisory, as far as a health advisory, to the end of December. I can't even imagine the schools opening in November. What's happening with you? Somebody knows how to use the computer and has one child at home, and they can work with that one child. But some of us on this right now have more than one child.
Absolutely.
More than two, or more than three, or more than four. I have 5. And I can't imagine what it would have been like because my children go from 50 to 22, all right? But sometimes they were all in school. Some of them were in school in public schools at the same time. And if you don't know what's going on with the computer, the teachers are doing as much as they can do. But they want to be back in the buildings so badly it's not even funny. But they don't want to be back in the buildings if they're not safe.
Well, we definitely needle down on that question. We'll circle back to the reopening the schools, because that's a really important question. I just want to make sure Yolanda get a chance to ask a question. I just want to say one thing before that, Frazier, when you said that you didn't believe in equity, you just believe in giving people what they want. I took from that is that you believe in redistribution of wealth, and I'm all about that. We need to redistribute the wealth. So I don't know, that's a ... I took. I don't know if that's the line you were going, but that's where I took it. And on to you, Yolanda, you take it somewhere else.
Hopefully you guys can hear me, and please forgive the crying child in the background. It's a rough day. So I have to go rogue on this, Chioma, please forgive me. But whenever we have the opportunity to speak to elected officials and potential upcoming elected officials, I would be remiss if I didn't kind of allude to the work that we do with working with the families that have children with disabilities, and just the overall kind of lack of concern or just urgency towards the need of those families, especially when we have data that supports that the achievement gap is so wide. And just overall, just even when it comes down to the work that I did alongside the ESSA task force, to the framing, the STAR framework, and just the lack of opportunity that was presented for families with children with disabilities to have the same access to information to be able to make informed decisions. That being said, all of that being said, certainly during this time of virtual learning, we can imagine that if during a time when children were physically in the building and had access to teachers, that now that we're in the virtual space, that we can imagine, that some are more successful than others, but from the families that we've been talking to and working with, it's been an extreme challenge. And so I can almost guess that achievement gap that was already struggling severely is going to be even more of a deficit once we are able to figure out what assessments are going to look like for these children. And so I just want to, when you have a parent who is informed in the way that we are, and we work to inform other parents on how to know exactly what to ask for your children, it gets kind of strenuous on your belief system of those that are in power, that they're going to bring forward the concerns that you have, you know, and I find that a lot of the time the voice of the parent that has a child with disability is missing in the forefront of our leadership. So I just wanted to know, how can you, as a Ward 4 representative, empower your constituents to be able to feel that, you know, this is going to be a topic of urgency that's not going to just be like when we hit the ground running, the first kind of popcorn thing that kind of gets everybody rallied, but just a continuous conversation towards some real resolutions. Yeah.
Well, I'm all for changing for the system completely. And I think that the first thing that can be done is there are elections in November. All right. And there's an election for the Ward 7 Board of Education. There's an election for Ward 8 Board of Education. There's an at-large election. There's an election for Ward 2 Board of Education. And there are elections for the City Council. And there are also elections right around the corner in 2022 for the mayor and for a lot of the people that are on the City Council. We've got to use our votes so that we can get people who think like we do. I mean, I hate to say it like it's personal, but it is. All right. You know, if everybody doesn't vote on November 3rd, we're going to have 4 more years of what we had the last 4 years. And that's going to happen if everybody doesn't vote. So that's the first thing, I think. The other thing is that I challenge you as an organization to come. The school board meets, the State Board of Education, it's not the school board, the State Board of Education meets every 3rd Wednesday of every month, and anyone in the city can testify. And we had in June and July, we had 51 people testify, which I think changed the mayor's mind about thinking about opening the schools in August. She was going to make the decision the day after our meeting. 51 teachers testified, all of them, because I asked them, how many of you will go back in the building? Nobody was going to go back in the building, right? And the teachers, I don't think, have changed a whole lot in their thinking. And when Janeese was saying about having people, you know, the people who know what education is about make decisions, that is so important. The teachers, you know, the Washington Teachers Union has gained a lot of strength in the last couple of years from where it was maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but because the teachers have become activists. And that's what you want your teachers to be, is activists. But we need to have the community testifying. Y'all could come and have a panel talking about, because you're right. And I was talking earlier about those students that don't have, I'm talking about neglected students, all right? Special ed students are neglected by society. The students who speak English, who don't speak English as their first language, or whose parents don't speak English and they have their little 5-year-old come to a PTA meeting for my senior high school student, and the 5-year-old student has to translate what I'm saying into Spanish for them, and because they understand what I'm saying. They're neglected by our society. And whatever you hear about, everything's, you know, a bed of roses, everything's not a bed of roses as far as education is concerned. People need to, when you're talking about getting signs up, people need to protest if their neighborhood school doesn't have an elevator and they have students who are disabled. That's against the law. We have schools in Ward 4 that don't have elevators for disabled students or teachers. That's against the law. They should be sued. I've been saying it for 2 years at every meeting I go to. Whittier and Truesdale. Whittier just got a roof. And the pandemic was what allowed Whittier to get a roof because they could work on the roof while the students weren't in the school, all right? They had leaks in that school for years and nobody did anything about it. So it's us, the community, that has to change the things.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you. Well, see, one part that makes this going into this really going well is that I have Dr. Frazier O'Leary as my Ward 4 school board member. And so I can't wait for the work we get to do together. Yolanda, I want to thank you for going off the cuff. That's the kind of person I am. People hate it all the time when I go off the cuff. And I do it like every time. I just have to go for my heart. You know, let me say, I think, you know, as a council member, how do I plan to continue to uplift your voice and act with some urgency regarding your needs? You know, one of the things that I think is important is to first include your voice. Now, I know we do have the Ward 4 Education Alliance. I'm not sure, you know, I know my predecessor had a bunch of committees for community members. And some of those committees were really just like lame duck committees, just like that he just put people on. So I don't want to be in a space where I just create some committee and just for namesake. But I am exploring, I think, you know, I was planning on just using our Ward 4 Education Alliance as the, you know, one of the education areas, but I would like to have a special, you know, group that's just focused on students with disabilities that I could meet with and actually get feedback from on a monthly basis, just to check in with, and if those community members specifically can kind of keep a pulse on our parents with students with disabilities in Ward 4, so that they can keep me abreast to the needs of those particular students and those parents at all time. That way, when there is a need for me to take immediate action, I can do that. And I can say, you know, whoever, you know, decides to be a part of that specific committee, my hope is that Chioma will be, so I can put her on the spot now, and but be a part of that group, so that I can continue to get that feedback. And then when I get that, you know, I want to take immediate action. What can I do in the now to help these families, you know, because of the gap that we're facing? You know, how is it working with, and those are questions that I even have now, right? I'm like, do we need co-ops for students with disabilities? How, you know, what can we do to bring services to you now? What kind of financial support? Because you know, the district has an obligation to provide a FAPE. So should they be sending people, you know, with COVID? How does that work with people being at your home? Because a lot of our, you know, students with disabilities can't get the services they need from virtual learning. That's just the limitation of their abilities. And so what can we do if we create a co-op type of space to be able to get them the services? And that's where I'm going to be needing your voice and including your voice. I don't like speaking on something that I don't know about or I don't have direct experience with. And I think that's what fools do, which is why I think, you know, how our education system is running right now is ridiculous, because we're not listening to educators, we're not listening to parents, we're not listening to teachers, and that's what makes it. That's why you know, I'm so frustrated and as passionate as Dr. Frazier O'Leary is about what's happening. But you know, my plan really is to obviously advocate for the priorities and policies that I think will impact our students with disabilities. You know, Birth to 3 for All is, you know, I'm going really hard on advocating for that, and actually universal child care is a piece of that. I think we stopped short with Birth to 3 for All. I think we really need to have universal child care and an understanding of what that looks like. That way students get, you know, their education abilities are assessed very early on from the time they're born. The earlier we can start addressing these things, the better the outcome for our students are. And we as an obligation, I think, as a government to do that and to provide that. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to be focused on, you know, throughout, and creating policy and space. But in the immediate is listening to you, creating committees specific to our students and parents with disabilities, and even our educators, because they have a hard job as well. Our special education teachers also, and aides also have a difficult job, and I'm very much aware of that as well.
Thank you so much for that. And you know, I put people on the spot all the time, and this is the spot I want to be on, and definitely be happy to serve. And knowing that all of our PAAT fellows are throughout the city in different wards, we'll always be able to draw on the intelligence, of a citywide lens while we're trying to resolve things in Ward 4. So thank you so much for that. I'm just excited to have you step into that place of power. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Parrish, who has joined us, who was another parent, PAAT fellow. And, you know, just, and thank you, Yolanda, for going off the cuff. Y'all know I'm an off the cuff person. You just do what we do, and really appreciate, you know, you speaking from the heart. So Michelle, if you just introduce yourself and just you on the spot, can you ask a question as well?
Absolutely. Good evening. I am Michelle Parrish. I am a resident of Ward 5.
Okay.
I am currently a parent member on Thrive by 5 DC, representing Ward 5. As you know, I'm a PAAT fellow here with our team, as well as a parent ambassador with AJE, serving the Birth to 3 community and early intervention services. And so it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us. I am a mom of 2, and one of my students does have a disability and is receiving services through an IEP here in the district. And one of the concerns that, you know, when we talk about reopening schools or not, we know that there may be challenges with sending certain types of special needs in terms of sensory issues or anything like that back into the building with mask requirements. And so we don't know what that's going to look like when we consider reopening schools. And so one of the concerns I have, and I wasn't sure how you might address this, is, you know, I do believe that we're going to see a huge a widening of the achievement gap with these students as a result of distance learning. It is not; it's beyond the absence of some of the services that are integrated and wrapped into the IEP. It is really about the ability to, you know, push the technology, to use the services through technology. Breakout rooms, all these different complications, and the fact that a parent has to be sitting there pretty much all the time to be able to help navigate how the day will go. And often my son eventually winds up having to just not participate in class for the day because it's too much going on and he has to shift and we have to pick it back up later. So what are your thoughts on when we think about reopening school? I know there's conversation about maybe reopening for special education, small pods. What are your thoughts as it relates to how not, you know, I guess on both sides of the coin, sending them back, but potentially having risk because sensory conditions may prohibit use of PPE. And then the achievement gap factor, the fact that we may, this particular moment in time could be the real divider and widening of that gap. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I can't imagine schools opening up in November the 9th. From what I've been able to, I don't know, we haven't been given any information about what's going on in the schools to get them ready for students. I mean, the virus isn't going away, right? I would imagine all of us have been touched by the virus in some way, but it doesn't care about anybody's education or anybody's anything. It's just a virus. You know, if you're around a lot of people that have the virus, and children are carriers, not necessarily getting the virus, but they're good carriers. I don't know what's going on. We haven't been given any information about what's happening in the buildings to get them ready for students. All right. My 2 children still are living with me now, my 26-year-old daughter, my 22-year-old son. And I've sort of decided that this is a gap year for them. All right, my son just graduated from college. My daughter's hasn't graduated from college, but she's been working. But because there's nowhere to go. They haven't been outside much at all, because, you know, there are over 200,000 people that died in the country from this virus that they don't have any cure for or anything like that. I don't know I wish that there were more information. We haven't been given any information from DCPS about what's going on in the buildings to get them ready. at all, which to me is a crime. And I think that I'm scared. This hybrid, I have no idea what that's a good name for something. I don't know what it is. All right. Is there going to be a gap? You bet your life there's going to be a gap. What we need to do is, I'll use a scientific term that I heard someplace. We need to mitigate the badness of this virus and the closing of the schools. We need to see where the kids are and go from there once they get back in the building. Because they've been out of the buildings now for half of a school year. All right? And it's going to be more than that when they go back, if they went back in November. And I wish that somebody in the government who's talking every day would say, well, this is what's going on in the schools. I've been told that all the schools have PPE. So they have masks. They don't have those plexiglass things up yet in the schools. I know that's true. And I don't know what they're doing. They're talking about, well, they're not going to have enough people they're not going to be checking temperatures why not check everybody's temperature? Well, you go to the bank or you go someplace else and they check your temperature. Everybody at the Safeway on Piney Branch is wearing a mask. Nobody goes in there we all wear masks when we go in places. It's not like it's something strange. Because, once you get those kids, look what happened in Florida and Georgia when they opened the schools. They skyrocketed with diseases, which they'll never, people are going to die from that. They're young. They probably don't get it as badly as somebody my age. I'm pretty careful about where I go because I'm way above the age of whatever the bad age is for people with being in places. But it's, we have to, people talk about the new normal. I'm so tired of hearing anybody say the new normal. We don't want to go back to normal. Normal wasn't working before the virus. The problems with the schools were there before the virus came. We want a new reality. We want some forward-thinking leaders who are willing to take a chance. They're talking about doing impact this year for teachers. They're talking about doing the star rating again for schools. How in the world can you do that when you're not in a school? All right, that should be thrown out the window. But they're so afraid of their jobs that they don't make sound, sane decisions. Janeese, it's on you.
Thinking about, your question as far as, what's going to happen, obviously I don't think we should be trying to return to school in November. I don't think the school district is prepared to do that. And they haven't created the plans that we probably should have started in March, earlier this year, creating those plans. As it relates to students with special needs, I do think that we're going to have to look at how do we create either learning pods or micro schools to help parents and families with students with disabilities with some very, I think, with very strict guidelines, because you're right, if you, different students, if you have students with cerebral palsy or a number of issues, they can't have PPE is just not possible for some of our students and for some of their aides and teachers. For those, if you've seen it, if you've seen it in person, how much of that is going to be. So I think we need to start, especially with our students with special needs, to stop the already growing gap. We need to start looking at what learning pods and micro schools are available for us, and then the nurses, aides, teachers, parents all would have to be on the same agreement on the same page regarding how their pod or how their micro school will operate. it's going to be the time right now to get innovative. And so we need people, everyone to start thinking innovative ways to do that. In the meantime, until that's able, we've seen across this country, some unions have donated grant money to parents with special needs to create their own learning pods, and to hire staff to be able to be a part of those pods. Whatever it is, we're definitely going to have to make that happen. And so, because if not, it's gonna be a gap year for everybody, pretty much. Even the parents and the students, and some parents are already ready to give up already, and the school year just started. And so, one of the things we just want to make sure is when we're addressing those two issues, that as a community, we're not sending our teachers back, our parents, our students back into a space or to an area that we don't have any regulations in place. They're talking about sending students back where they don't have nurses for every school. We don't even have one nurse, let alone the number of nurses that would be needed for us to effectively have, the ability for people to take everyone's temperature. And then what happens if a child does have a temperature? And what if the nurse's office has 20 students down the line for it, and that one nurse is all over? So, I think right now where we are as a school district right now is we need to start thinking about what we're going to do with the pandemic and this crisis. What we can do in the gap that we're in to bridge that, but to make decisions that, I think, prioritizes, our parents and our teachers and our students being able to live, and their health and safety being of the utmost importance. As it relates to, what we're going to see, I think we may end up having to switch over to a year-long model for a couple of years, where we have school even throughout the summer. Some school we've had, and I think some schools do that now, but that's not what, where we are as a district. But we may have to consider, how do we make up the time laws? If we make up that time laws, what does it look like? And we may have to end up switching to a period of year-long schools for a 3-year, 5-year period, whatever it would take to be able to close that gap. And, I know everyone will be upset, we need the summer, but I think, at this point we may have to do a year-long school. And we also need to alternatively look at I heard they're going to still be doing the park testing and impact evaluations and all of that. It's like, you cannot continue with that mess right now while we're in the middle of a pandemic. It makes no sense. It's illogical, and it's impractical. And so let's take away some of the pressures that we're putting on parents and teachers regarding that, and taking that away, and start looking at what the long-term plan would be to make up for the achievement gap, the achievement loss throughout this next year.
Do you think you mentioned something, I think, that's kind of interesting, which is the gap, right? And that on some levels this is a gap year, right? So you think that there's too much of a focus on trying to get the number of school days in per the federal regulations for number of school days or local regulations? You think there's too much emphasis on trying to get the days in count and to try to maintain a standard of academic number of days and attendance? There's still attendance goals that they're trying to meet across the program, which is very perplexing, considering the attendance is going to be, there'll be ebbs and flows based on what a family is able to do. And so do you think there's too much focus on that? And do you think that as a country, not just a local jurisdiction, do you think we need to start really thinking about how we call this a gap year and create a long-term plan of recovery for the country that doesn't just include the economy, but a recovery and accountability for the school system as well?
One of the things that, that was really good. One of the things that needs to happen with our leadership is that our leadership needs to understand the community. It needs to stand up for the community. All right, we're too bound by these federal regulations anyway. If you can imagine that the Secretary of Education is in charge of the federal regulations and she knows nothing about education at all. All right, so that somebody's got to stand up and say, well, we're going to change the way we do things because we're here trying to get our children educated. And the whole thing about that the regulations is there is a certain, that every state had to submit something to a special waiver because they were not going to have enough days left in the school year, let's say 180 days or whatever. That's, it's quality, not quantity.
Yeah.
And the problem with, like right now, attendance is taken for your children who are in DCPS. I know attendance, once a child signs on, that child is present for the day. If the child signs on at 8:30 in the morning, then that child is present for the day. If the child turns off if I turn off my video right now and I'm still talking or whatever, my name's still on the screen, all right? They could be not doing anything, but they're present for the day. And that's what all those people downtown are concerned with, are the numbers, the data. We're not dealing with data, we're dealing with hearts and souls of people. They're not data. And the problem right now is we got all these children who are trying to get an education, all these teachers who are trying to administer an education with a unique situation, that's for sure, all right? When I was elected in December of 2018, when schools were schools that you went to every day. Well, your children haven't gone to school since March, every day. And God knows how long it's going to last. But we need to rise up. I make up a line. It's called lift every voice. All right. I'm just kidding, folks. All right. But that's what we need to do. We need to lift every voice in the community to get people to knock on doors and bang on windows and go to all these community meetings and go downtown and testify in front of the city council, in front of the state board. We're the only people besides the city council that are, at least you can testify and it's on television or whatever. It might take, for the last 3 meetings, there have been 5 hours of meetings, all right? But to me, it's been very productive, most of it, some of it hasn't been. But this is a crisis situation. And the city doesn't act like it's if it's a crisis, all of us are parents, except for Janeese, and she will be. And we know we're in crisis situations all the time as parents, unless you've got those special children who never cause any problems, all right? Who, raise your hand if you have one of those, and nobody raised their hands, all right? And it's a crisis situation, but it doesn't sound like, if it's a crisis situation, people should be letting us know what's going on. You can't get information from anybody. Call the mayor. Call the deputy mayor of education. She appointed him. Call the state superintendent. She appointed her. Call the chancellor. She appointed him. Call everybody. All right. Call me. By the way, I put my phone number and my email in the chat, so you can get in touch with me.
We're gonna call you.
Please call me. If you're in a different ward, I don't care. I'm on the State Board of Education. I'm representing Ward 4, but I'm just here for students and the parents and things like that. I got no agenda. I'm not running for re-election again this year. After this year, I guarantee you that. I'll be 80. I'm not doing that. I want a young person to run. Someone young, Chioma, who lives in Ward 4.
I'm not listening to you. I know what you're saying too.
No, I know. No, you're on the
I know what you're saying.
That's great.
But yeah, Michelle, I there's nothing else I need to add to what Frazier said, but just, in general, what we're seeing across the country is, the questions being asked, what are we taking attendance for? What is the purpose of us taking attendance? And then in the purpose of it taking attendance comes the answers to the questions of how we are servicing our parents and our students and taking into account the trauma that is being placed on them as a result of what's happening. One of the things I think is missing is that I don't know how many, school counselors we have. We don't have enough to really deal with. There should be, during the school day or during the week now, time for students to just talk with their school counselors and trauma support staff, because this is a traumatic time and this is a traumatic experience that we're all going through. And so, yes, do I think there needs to be leniency and flexibility across attendance? Absolutely. There should be leniency and flexibility and a recognition of the time we're in. I also think there needs to be more trauma support for our students and our families at this time, because this is something that we are going through, and we can't just act like things are normal, and we don't really know, for our students. As parents, we're figuring out what the impacts on us are. We still also have to figure out what the impacts are on our students and how they are mentally and emotionally showing up to these spaces as well.
Thank you all so much for, your candor, your just realness on these issues. I can't say again enough, as a proud Ward 4 resident, that I'm very proud to have both of you represent the people of Ward 4, and I know that we're going to push the lever a bit further with both of your visions and your leadership. And just so we're clear on what that vision and leadership is, we're just going to close out, because again, we're a little bit over time, with you all just letting us know what your vision is for the next 4 years of your term. Thank you. And we're going to
I can do that very quickly. I'm gonna do the same thing I did just now for the next 4 years. I don't, because I'm not satisfied with what the systems have done for our students, and so I'm that guy that when I walk in the room, people, oh God, there he is again. I'm just here. I'm an advocate. I'm an advocate for education. I love teaching. I love watching students learn, and we've got so many great teachers and principals and other administrators, but we need the people who are in charge to get out of their offices and start earning their big bucks. Period. And it's got to take the community to get them out of their offices. You got to raise hell. What did John Lewis say? It's good trouble. And that's what we need to do.
Get into good trouble.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm gonna add on a little bit of what Frazier said. I'm ready to get into some good trouble. I came, into this fight because I was tired of seeing working families, working people, those of us who've been, generations here in the district. The city continues to grow, but not that prosperity really hasn't benefited all of us, and I have been tired of seeing that occur, and I want to approach it from a way of bringing not only inclusiveness, but building. I think a leader is only as good as how many other leaders they produce. I'm an organizer at heart, and so I want to produce more organizers and more leaders who are ready to fight and get into the fight with our community. And so, when I tell everybody's like, well, what do you do with constituent services? I said, I'm gonna be leading and teaching people how to also call on our government to be accountable. And the more you lead and educate and teach others, that's more people amongst our constituent services staff. You as an individual are constituent services, and the more you can actually serve your community, your block, your neighbor, the better and bigger we're going to be as a community. I am tired of everyone in this city calling themselves a progressive, calling themselves an equity champion. I don't want to hear any more names. I just want to see action, and I want to see action in 2 ways. One, that in the legislative end, where are your policies? Because if you are saying that you are for the people, then we need people first policies. And people first policies for me looks like accomplishing and making sure that we can have not only birth to 3 for all, but creating universal child care. What people first policy looks like to me is a universal basic income for all. What people first policy looks like to me is expanding and extending our rent control laws. What people first looks like to me is making sure that we have Medicare for all in our community. What it looks like for me is giving Black and brown families their due as it relates to making sure that we are able to have reparations. And I don't mean a check. I mean, we should have tuition-free college. I mean, we should have student loan forgiveness. I mean, we should have the ability to send our child from the time they're born to quality childcare and all the way through education to workforce development, to workforce in University of District of Columbia. Everyone should be working together to create this. What it looks like for me, as we move forward as a ward is obviously a focus on improving our education system. I would love to see us in mayoral control, return some of jurisdiction back to school board members and leaders like Frazier O'Leary who are educators. I would like to see us in the impact evaluation system in DC public schools and give an evaluation system where we are keeping teachers here and retaining our teachers and valuing our teachers and paying them. And on the charter school side, having transparency so that we know when teachers, whether they're, are the difference between what a woman teacher and a male teacher is making versus what educators are making versus administrators are making. And it shouldn't be such a gap that some of your teachers are not getting paid, but your administrators are living lavishly. Let's talk about real equity, because that's what it looks like, and you can't have equity without having transparency. So I'm all about bringing transparency to this council process so that people no longer can see council members show up in a performative manner, and so you think they're for the people because they showed up to a go-go. Instead of that, you will know whether they're for the people on how they're voting on the council. You can't say you're for the people if you're voting against paid family leave, you're voting against fair wages for women. You can't say that you're for the people when you don't fight for us when it comes to housing and you side with developers and take away TOPA rights. So we're in a space where performative is done because we can't have that. And we're gonna bust that wide open with transparency. So I plan on bringing transparency, honesty, building leaders and organizers to help me in this fight so that we can move together as a ward and a city. And in Ward 4, everyone loves to say, where Ward 4 goes, the city goes. That's Ward 4 is like pride and joy to say that. Well, if that's the case, Ward 4, then if the city is going to go the way we want it to go, then we need to lead with equity, lead with transparency, and lead with accountability. And that's how I plan on moving forward and continuing to uplifting voices of parents like you all who are in this fight and being able to advocate for you and use this space as a way to do that.
Go, Janese.
I was gonna say 4 more years, and we ain't even yet.
Yeah, that was powerful.
Very
Very
powerful.
Great.
And very
Thank you, Mayor George.
Oh, no.
Right. I'm on that redistribution. Let's make it equal for the people, right? And so thank you all for your time. Just very honored that you all take the time out to come and speak to us as mothers and, and organizers now here doing the work. But we know that the work is yet in front of us based on just the conversation we just had. And we look forward to working hand in hand to make sure that all of our city's children and all of our Ward 4 children, get the protections that they need with our language. So thank you all. Have a great
I've got one thing, Chioma. Can I, because I mentioned to you about today is my wife's birthday, all right?
Right.
And she died 5 days after her birthday 3 years ago. And she was a Head Start teacher. And at her funeral, my son said I spoke for 20 minutes, but I don't think I spoke that long. But, she was the person I was in love with. And I mentioned that my daughter would come to me and say, Daddy, I don't know if I'm supposed to do this or not. And I'd say, what would mommy do?
Mm-hmm.
All right. After the funeral, a couple of weeks after, my granddaughter, who's 17 now, gave me this bracelet. and this bracelet says, "What would Myra do?" My wife's name was Myra. And I live my life by what would Myra do. Okay. So when I was just channeling her when I was talking today. Okay. We felt the same way about education. We felt the same way about minorities. She was African American. I'm not. I don't know if you know that, but I'm not. And and we felt especially the same about students for whom English wasn't their first language, and for students with special needs. And so that's what I do. Okay. And I know that's how Janeese feels too. And so we're ready to just disrupt this government, but you gotta help us disrupt it. Okay. So your charge, because I'm older than you, your charge is that you all need to set up a panel to speak at the State Board of Education in November.
All right, we're on it.
I'm going to skip October.
Right.
Okay. But November, I want to see at least 3 or 4 of you on the panel. Okay.
You hear that, ladies? Let y'all speak for yourselves, right?
Yeah.
Why skip October?
Right.
Well, because we got a packed agenda in October.
Oh, okay.
It's carrying over from the last meeting we had.
Okay.
No, because then it'll be November. No, okay, you're right. Let's do it in October, because in October it'll be our last meeting before the 9th
Fiscal.
of November.
Yep.
No, the heck with the fiscal year. The 9th of November, when she's got to make a decision, she being the mayor, about whether or not schools are going to open, and it's not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, we
And,
got a lot. We got a lot of stuff that we got planned to address some of these issues, and you guys
Great.
will see that as we roll it out. Like Janeese said,
And you can testify.
show and tell over here. So
You can testify about what you can test. It doesn't have there's not a theme or anything like that. So
Yeah.
y'all can testify about one theme.
got
But
it.
those different voices would be extremely helpful.
We'll circle back with you and see if how
Great,
much
great.
on that.
You got my number on the chat and
Yeah.
my email.
Don't get scared when you start getting texts at 3 a.m. Frazier.
Hey, look.
Because that's when my kids has insomnia. He doesn't sleep. So
Well, my wife passed at 3:55 in the morning. I'm up at 3 o'clock every morning.
that's so weird. My dad passed at 3:11 a.m. So that is a sacred hour. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. We look forward to seeing y'all in the trenches. Lots of work to do. Again, stay well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you, kids. Thank you, kids.